Burial Grounds.
Hey guys, in this video we will be guiding you through Heroic Shadowmoon Burial Grounds. Keep in mind the information in the footage in this video is from beta and is subject to change. Heroic Shadowmoon Burial Grounds is almost exactly the same as the normal Burial Grounds, but things just hit harder. If you've done the normal before, then you should have no problem with this Heroic. You'll want to focus down Bone Menders first, as they are the healers of the instance. They will continuously cast Shadow Bolt, but you will need to be ready to interrupt Shadowmen to prevent any healing. The reanimated Ritual Bones didn't seem to do anything of significance, so they will be your lowest priority. The Void spawns you will encounter can deal a large amount of damage to your party if their Void Pulse is not interrupted. We would advise weaving in stuns with your interrupts to avoid being overwhelmed with damage. Be aware of any purple runes on the ground. If triggered, they will deal a large amount of shadow damage, so avoid these. Loyalists will cast Shadow Bolt, but you will need to watch out for a Shadow Orb that they will shoot out in a line at a random target. Anyone caught in its path will take a large amount of shadow damage. Sedon Blood Fury is the first boss you will encounter. When charging in, you will need to avoid the purple runes. These will easily kill you before you even get to poke the boss. Tanks will need to be aware of Sedana's Death Spike ability. This is a buff that you will see on the boss. It has a maximum of 3 charges, causing her successful attacks to grant 3 additional melee attacks that will deal additional shadow damage. On Heroic, Sedana will call down 2 shadow-infused daggers overhead of 2 random players. If you are targeted by one of these, you will see a purple swirl under your feet, in which you will need to move away from. The daggers will remain in the ground and deal a moderate amount of shadow damage to anyone within 4 yards. Sedana will also use an ability called Dark Communion. This summons a defiled spirit that will be making its way towards the boss. If they get too close to her, she will devour the spirit, healing her for 20% of her health and increase her damage dealt by 10%. So DPS needs to switch to this ad immediately. They need to be slowed, rooted, and or stunned to ensure they die before reaching Sedana. Throughout the fight, Sedana will channel Whispers of the Dark Star. This ability cannot be interrupted, and it will deal AoE damage to your party for the duration of the channel. Sedana also casts Dark Eclipse, which deals a deadly amount of shadow damage every second. You will need to find the empowered phase of the moon, which looked to be the eclipse moon every time during our encounter. The empowered symbol will have a slight glow compared to the other symbols. You want to be standing on the icon that looks like a full moon. Standing on this will grant you the buff Lunar Purity, which will decrease damage taken by 80%. For the trash on the way to the second boss, you will encounter some new mobs. Enslavers will channel a buff onto nearby subjugated souls. This will decrease the damage they take. The Enslaver will need to be stunned, knocked down, or CC'd in order to interrupt this channel. When their channel on the subjugated soul is disrupted, they begin to channel Rending Void Lash on a random target. This can be interrupted by normal interrupting abilities, and it looked like it did a moderate amount of shadow damage over the duration of the channel. Exhumers will cast Exhume the Crypts, attempting to activate 2 nearby crypts or tombs. Normal interrupting abilities will not work, so they need to be stunned or knocked down in order to disrupt the cast. The first set of crypts can be passed by easily if you don't walk close to them. However, the next set you will need to activate and kill, as there is not enough room to bypass them safely. Before engaging the next boss, we found it best to have the tank activate the crypts that circle around the outside of the boss's room and pull back the adds. This will avoid having extra unnecessary adds during the encounter. The first of Nalish abilities you will see is Void Blast. This is a channel that will deal significant shadow damage to anyone caught in it. Tanks will need to face the boss away from your party. You will need to spread out for when Nalish casts Planar Shift. When the cast is complete, he will teleport to a random player and begin casting Void Vortex. This will pull players towards Nalish, dealing shadow damage each second. You will need to be ready to move, and we would advise using any movement speed increases in order to clear out of the vortex quickly. Being preemptively spread out will prevent multiple players from taking damage from the vortex, giving everyone else some easy DPS time. Be aware while Nalish is channeling Void Devastation, Shadow Bolts will rain down. Just avoid the purple swirls and runes on the ground during the channel. When Nalish casts Soul Steal, you will be phased and forced to DPS down and subdue your soul. While phased, you will be taking shadow damage every second. If you're taking too long to kill your soul, then it would be best to use a personal cooldown to survive. Once you subdue your soul, you will need to run up to it and right-click it. If you are able to do this within 20 seconds, you will gain the buff Return Soul, increasing all damage and healing done by 40% for 20 seconds. On your way to the third boss, you will encounter the Skitterling's much larger and deadlier counterpart, the monstrous Corpse Spider. They will cast Necrotic Burst. This will deal shadow damage to the entire party. This can be interrupted, but we would advise saving any interrupts and stuns for when they cast Death Venom. This will deal a large amount of damage to a random target. Be aware that you can pull the plagued bats that are flying around above you. You will also encounter these again when you get closer to the next boss. They will apply a stacking disease on their target. Healers and tanks will need to be aware of this dot as it can quickly stack up to a high amount of ticking damage. Tanks will need to get in melee range of the worm, otherwise it will spit at random targets. They will also need to face the worm away from the group due to its ability Body Slam. This is a frontal cone that will not only deal damage but will knock you back into the surrounding water if you are hit by it. This is easily avoided, however, if you do get knocked back in the water, you will need to swim to a geyser that will launch you out of the water. The next boss you will face is Bone Maw. Bone Maw will cast the ability Body Slam, which is the same ability seen while fighting the carrion worms before the boss. Tanks will need to position themselves to one side of him so this won't hit your group, and make sure they do not get knocked off the platform by this ability. If Bone Maw does not have a valid target in melee range, he will spit uncontrollably, dealing a large amount of nature damage to your group. Throughout the fight, he will place Necrotic Pitch at the feet of random players. This will deal shadow damage every second and reduce movement speed by 75%. At least one of the puddles needs to be placed at a range that the tank will be able to get to quickly and easily to avoid Bone Maw's main ability. When Bone Maw begins to inhale, all party members need to be standing in a necrotic pitch on the ground to prevent from being drawn in and eaten. After inhale is finished, Bone Maw will screech, summoning 2 carrion worms. They will spit, dealing a moderate amount of nature damage to a random player if left without a valid melee target. We found that having a non-tank player stand in melee was more devastating than the spit on the random targets. However, the tank will need to stick to Bone Maw and make sure to keep him facing away from the group because he will continue to do his Body Slam ability. The worms summoned will also be casting the slam, so be aware that the safe zones of your platform will be limited. Once the carrion worms join the fight, it is much easier to kill them, as we never had Bone Maw summon anymore. Once they're out of the way, you only have to worry about the boss's inhale and slam. Nerzul is the final boss of the instance, and he has a grand total of 3 abilities. Tanks will need to face Nerzul towards the outside of the room to avoid hitting their party with Malevolence. This is a frontal cone that will deal a large amount of shadow damage and apply a debuff that reduces their damage dealt by 50%. Throughout the fight, Nerzul will summon Omens of Death. These are runes that will appear on the ground, dealing shadow damage based off of the player's proximity to the effect. His most devastating ability is Ritual of Bones. Nerzul will summon a line of undead that will move across the platform, pretty much killing anyone in its path. It is best to mark a focus target that the DPS will quickly burn down, creating a safe opening to pass through. We would strongly advise the tanks wait before passing through the opening until after he does Malevolence, the frontal AoE. It's also not a bad idea to just stand at the point where the opening will be and not worry about running. We hope you've enjoyed this video and found the information helpful to you and your group. If you are interested in more heroic dungeon guides or want to know more about our team, check out the links provided in the description below.